The apartment sat quiet on the last night of the year. A single lamp cast warm light across the small living room where Ethan Cole sat alone at a table meant for two. His dinner had gone cold an hour ago, but he hadn't noticed. Through the window, distant fireworks popped and crackled over the Chicago skyline, their colors blooming and fading like promises no one intended to keep. He picked up his phone and dialed his mother's house, keeping his voice light when 7-year-old Nora answered with a sleepy hello. He told her he loved her, told her to have sweet dreams, told her daddy was having a great time. When he hung up, the silence rushed back in. The clock on the wall showed 11:58. Then came the knock. Ethan didn't move at first. He lived in a modest building in Lincoln Park, the kind of place where neighbors nodded politely but rarely visited. At this hour, on this night, a knock at his door made no sense. He pushed back from the table and crossed the room slowly, his footsteps quiet on the hardwood floor. When he opened the door, the last person he expected to see was standing in his hallway. Vivian Hale wore a charcoal wool coat over what looked like expensive clothes, the kind that cost more than his monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her face held that controlled expression he'd seen in company meetings, the one that revealed nothing. But something was different tonight. Her eyes moved too quickly, taking in his apartment with the sharp assessment of someone cataloging details they didn't expect to need. "Mr. Cole," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a tension beneath it that Ethan couldn't place. "Miss Hale?" He stood in the doorway, very aware of the contrast between them. She was the CEO of Meridian Technologies, a company that employed nearly 4,000 people across 3 states. He was a facilities engineer who made sure the building systems ran smoothly and the lights stayed on. They had spoken exactly twice in the 3 years he'd worked there, both times in elevators, both times about the weather. "I need to speak with you," she said. "Now." Ethan glanced back at his cold dinner, his empty apartment, the television playing a New Year's countdown he'd muted an hour ago. Part of him wanted to ask how she'd found his address, why she'd come here, what could possibly be so urgent on December 31st. Instead, he stepped aside and let her in. Vivian walked into his living room like she was entering a conference room, her posture straight, her movements precise. But once inside, she seemed uncertain where to stand. Her eyes moved from the modest furniture to the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, from the single plate of food to the window where fireworks still painted the sky. "You have a daughter," she said. It wasn't a question. She was looking at a photograph on the bookshelf, a picture of Ethan and Nora at the zoo, both of them laughing at something the camera hadn't captured. "Nora, she's 7. She's spending the holiday with her grandmother." Ethan didn't offer more. He'd learned early in his career that people like Vivian Hale didn't make small talk, and they certainly didn't show up at employees' apartments at midnight to discuss family photos. Vivian turned from the photograph. In the soft light of his living room, she looked younger than she did in the office, and more tired. "I apologize for the intrusion. I know this is irregular." Irregular is one word for it. "I couldn't think of anyone else." She said it simply, without drama, but the admission seemed to cost her something. Vivian Hale, who commanded boardrooms and made decisions worth millions, couldn't think of anyone else to talk to on New Year's Eve. The clock struck midnight. Somewhere outside, cheers erupted from neighboring apartments, and the fireworks intensified into their grand finale. Neither of them acknowledged it. They stood in Ethan's small living room, 2 people who shouldn't have anything in common. While the world celebrated the turning of the year, Vivian moved to his window and stood with her back to him, watching the fireworks die down. "There's a decision I have to make, after the holiday. Something significant." She paused, and Ethan watched her reflection in the glass. "I've been going over the numbers, the projections, the legal implications. I've consulted attorneys and financial advisors and board members who tell me exactly what they think I want to hear." "And what do they tell you?" "That I should proceed, that it's the rational choice, that the market will respond favorably." She turned to face him. "But none of them tell me the truth. None of them care about the truth. They care about their positions, their bonuses, their proximity to power." Ethan leaned against his kitchen counter, arms crossed. He was still trying to understand why she was here, in his apartment, speaking to him like they were colleagues rather than a CEO and a man who fixed heating systems for a living. "With respect, Miss Pale, I'm not sure what you think I can offer. I'm not exactly part of your inner circle." "That's precisely why I'm here." Vivian's voice sharpened slightly. "You have no stake in telling me what I want to hear. You have no political position to protect. According to your personnel file, you've been offered promotions 3 times and declined each one. Either you're the most unambitious man in the company or the most principled. Either way, you're the only person I could think of who might actually be honest with me." The mention of his personnel file should have bothered him, but Ethan found himself more intrigued than offended. Whatever was troubling Vivian Hale, it was significant enough to send her across the city on New Year's Eve to stand in a stranger's apartment to admit vulnerability to someone she barely knew. "What's the decision?" he asked. Vivian's expression flickered, just for a moment, and Ethan glimpsed something beneath the controlled surface. Fear, maybe, or exhaustion. "I can't tell you the specifics, not yet, but I need you to understand something." She stepped closer, lowering her voice as though someone might overhear them in his empty apartment. "The people who advise me, the board members, the executives, they don't see me as a person. They see me as a position, a signature, a means to their own ends. I've built this company for 8 years, and I don't trust a single one of them." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan had worked in corporate environments long enough to know that loneliness existed at every level, but hearing it stated so plainly by someone of the very top was different. Vivian Hale had everything the world said should make a person successful, and yet here she was, alone at midnight, searching for someone who would tell her the truth. "You don't know me," Ethan said carefully. "How do you know you can trust me?" "I don't." Vivian met his eyes directly. "But I've watched you for 3 years. I've seen how you interact with the cleaning staff, the security guards, the interns everyone else ignores. I've read your emails, the ones where you advocated for better safety equipment for your team, the ones where you pushed back against budget cuts that would have affected the maintenance staff's benefits." She paused. "You treat people like they matter. That's rarer than you might think." Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He glanced at the screen and saw Nora's face, a video call coming through at 12:15 in the morning. His daughter should have been asleep hours ago. "I need to take this," he said, reaching for the phone. Part of him expected Vivian to object, to remind him that she was his CEO and her time was valuable. Instead, she simply nodded and turned back to the window, giving him what privacy she could in the small space. Ethan answered the call, and Nora's face filled the screen, her dark hair muzzed from sleep, her eyes bright with excitement. "Daddy, Grammy let me stay up for midnight. Did you see the fireworks? Did you make a wish?" He smiled, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease at the sight of her. "I saw them, sweetheart. They were beautiful. Did you make a wish?" "I wished for a puppy, and I wished you weren't alone tonight. Grammy said you might be lonely." Ethan's heart clenched. 7 years old, and she was already worrying about him. "I'm okay, Nora, I promise. Daddy's having a good night. Do you have a friend there? Grammy says everyone needs friends on New Year's." Ethan glanced at Vivian, who was still facing the window but clearly listening. "Actually, yes, an old friend stopped by to say hello." "That's good." Nora yawned, her eyelids drooping. "I'm glad you're not alone, Daddy. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart. Now go to sleep. I'll see you tomorrow." "Okay." When the call ended, Ethan looked up to find Vivian watching him. Her expression had shifted in a way he couldn't quite define. Something softer around the edges, something almost vulnerable. "She worries about you," Vivian said quietly. "She's 7. She shouldn't have to worry about anything." Ethan set his phone down. "But kids see more than we give them credit for. They know when something's wrong, even if they don't have the words for it." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, stripped of its professional veneer. "I used to worry about my father. He ran the company before me, before it was public, before any of this." She gestured vaguely at herself, at everything she represented. "He worked constantly. I barely knew him. By the time I was old enough to understand what he did, I'd already learned that the company would always come first. Family dinners were scheduled between meetings. Birthdays were celebrated whenever his calendar allowed. I grew up believing that was normal. Was it? Ethan asked. It was what I knew. Vivian moved to his couch and sat down, the first time she'd allowed herself to settle since arriving. My mother left when I was 11. She said she couldn't compete with a building full of employees for my father's attention. He didn't even fight for her. He just let her go and went back to work the next morning. Ethan didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. He simply listened, sensing that what Vivian needed wasn't comfort, but witness, someone to hear the truths she'd never been allowed to speak. I promised myself I'd be different. I'd make decisions based on data, not emotion. I'd treat every choice as a calculation, weighing costs and benefits, minimizing risk. She built walls around everything that might make me weak. She looked up at him, and for the first time, Ethan saw the woman behind the title. But now, I'm facing something that doesn't fit into a spreadsheet. The decision I have to make affects people, not just numbers. And I don't trust myself to make it correctly because I've spent so long learning not to feel anything. Ethan crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. What is it you're afraid of? That I'll make the wrong choice because there's no one left to tell me to stop. No one who cares about anything except what I can do for them. The apartment fell silent, except for the distant sounds of celebration still drifting up from the streets. Ethan thought about his own choices, the promotions he'd declined, the simpler life he'd chosen. He thought about Nora, about the promises he'd made when her mother left, about the nights he'd spent working out the math of what mattered most. I turned down those promotions because of Nora, he said finally. Her mother left when she was 2, just walked out one day, said she wasn't put out for motherhood. I was working 60-hour weeks back then, climbing the ladder, doing everything I was supposed to do to succeed. And then, suddenly, I was alone with a toddler, and none of it mattered anymore. Vivian listened without interrupting, her attention fully focused on him. I had to choose. I could keep chasing the career, hire nannies, miss birthdays and school plays and all the moments you can't get back. Or I could step back, take a job that paid less but let me be home for dinner, be present for the things that actually matter. He met her eyes. I chose her. Every time, I chose her, and I've never regretted it. But you gave up so much, Vivian said. The opportunity, the advancement, the money. I gave up things I didn't actually want. What I kept was what I needed. Ethan leaned forward. You asked why I declined those promotions. It's because I've sat in enough meetings to know what that world does to people. They start out wanting to make a difference, and they end up making excuses. They tell themselves the compromises are temporary, that they'll do better once they reach the next level. But the next level just brings bigger compromises, and eventually they can't remember who they were before. Vivian's jaw tightened. You're saying I'm one of those people? I'm saying you're sitting in my living room at midnight because you're afraid you might become one. That's not the same thing. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Vivian stood abruptly and walked to the window again, her reflection ghostly against the glass. When she spoke, her voice was harder than before. You don't understand the pressure, the responsibility. 4,000 people depend on decisions I make, their mortgages, their children's college funds, their retirements. If I make a mistake, I don't just lose a job, I destroy lives. And what about the decision you're facing now? Ethan asked. How many lives does that affect? Vivian didn't turn around. The restructuring plan I've been asked to approve would eliminate 347 positions across our Midwest operations. The numbers make sense. The facilities are underperforming. The market has shifted, and maintaining them is draining resources we need elsewhere. She paused, her voice dropping. On paper, it's the right choice, the responsible choice. The analysts have run every scenario, and they all point to the same conclusion. Ethan felt the weight of the number settle over him. 347 people, not positions or headcount or resources. People, families, lives that would be upended by a signature on a document. And off paper? He asked. Vivian finally turned to face him. Off paper, those are people who have worked for this company for years, some of them for decades. They chose us over other opportunities. They built their lives around the assumption that we would be there for them. And now I'm supposed to reward that loyalty by putting them out of work 2 weeks after the holidays? Is there another option? There are always other options. Slower restructuring, voluntary buyouts, retraining programs, but they cost more, take longer, carry more risk. Her voice grew bitter. The board doesn't want options. They want a decisive leader who makes the hard choices without flinching. They want someone who treats people like numbers on a spreadsheet. Ethan stood and walked to where she was standing by the window. Outside, the fireworks had ended, and the city had settled into the quiet that came after celebration. The strange stillness of a world poised between what was and what would be. 3 years ago, he said quietly, there was a woman in the janitorial staff, Maria. She'd worked for the company for 18 years. Since before you took over. She was diagnosed with cancer, and the treatments were expensive. Her insurance covered most of it, but not all. She was going to lose her house. Vivian frowned slightly. I don't remember this. You wouldn't. It never reached your level. But I remember the day she came to work crying because she didn't know how she was going to pay for her daughter's school supplies while also covering her medical bills. Do you know what she said? She said she was grateful for her job because at least she had insurance. She said working for Meridian was the only thing keeping her family together. What happened to her? She died last spring. But before she did, she told me something I've never forgotten. She said she didn't know if God was real, but she knew that kindness was. She said every time someone at work helped her, covered her shift, brought her lunch, it was proof that people could choose to be good to each other. Ethan turned to face Vivian directly. 347 positions. That's 347 Mariahs. 347 people who are trusting you to remember that they're human beings, not line items. Vivian's composure cracked, just slightly. Just for a moment, but Ethan saw it, the tremor in her jaw, the brightness in her eyes, the way her hands clenched at her sides. You think I don't know that? Her voice was rough. You think I haven't spent the last 3 months staring at those numbers and seeing faces? I know their names. I've read their personnel files. I know who's a single parent who's caring for elderly parents, who's 2 years from retirement. I know exactly what I'm being asked to do. Then why are you considering it? The question struck her like a physical blow. Vivian stepped back, her professional armor reassembling itself, even as her eyes betrayed her. Because that's what leadership is. Making the hard choices, doing what's necessary for the greater good, even when it hurts. Is it? Ethan didn't back down. Or is that just what people tell themselves so they can sleep at night after making choices they know are wrong? The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of two strangers finding common ground. It was the tense stillness of a confrontation neither had expected. You have no idea what you're talking about, Vivian said. But her voice lacked conviction. You fix air conditioners and check electrical panels. You've never had to make a decision that affects thousands of people. You're right. I haven't. Ethan refused to take offense at her dismissal. But I've made decisions that affected one person, my daughter, and I've learned that how you treat the one teaches you everything you need to know about how you'll treat the many. She stared at him for a long moment. The defensive anger in her expression slowly faded, replaced by something more vulnerable. Exhaustion, perhaps, or the weight of finally hearing a truth she'd been avoiding. I don't know how to be the person they need me to be, she admitted quietly. I was trained to analyze, to calculate, to optimize. No one ever taught me how to be kind when kindness isn't efficient. Ethan thought about Nora, about all the times she'd asked him questions that had no easy answers. How do you explain death to a 5-year-old? How do you help a child understand why some people have more than others? How do you teach someone to be good in a world that often rewards the opposite? When Nora was 4, he said, she asked me why I didn't yell at her like other daddies yelled at their kids. She'd been to a play date and seen her friend's father lose his temper over something small, and she wanted to know why I was different. Vivian watched him, waiting. I told her that being loud didn't make you strong. I said that real strength was staying calm when you wanted to scream, being patient when you wanted to give up, choosing love even when it was harder than anger. He paused. She looked at me with those big eyes and said, "But isn't it scary to be soft when everyone else is hard?" And I told her that was exactly why it was brave. Something shifted in Vivian's expression, not surrender exactly, but a loosening of the grip she held on herself. Leadership isn't about making the hard choices, Ethan continued. Anyone can be ruthless. Anyone can sign a piece of paper that hurts people and call it strategy.
Real leadership is having the courage to find another way. It's accepting that doing the right thing might cost you something personally. And if there is no other way, there's always another way. It might be harder, it might take longer, it might require you to fight people who are comfortable with the easy answer. Ethan met her eyes steadily. But if you sign that restructuring plan, you won't just be eliminating jobs. You'll be telling every person in your company that their loyalty means nothing, that when times get tough, they're expendable. And once people believe that, you'll never get their trust back. The night had grown colder. Through the window, Ethan could see the first hints of gray in the eastern sky. They'd been talking for hours, and the new year had already begun without either of them noticing. Vivian moved away from the window and sat back down on his couch, her movement slower now, weighted with thought. "When I was young," she said, "I believed that if I worked hard enough, I could control everything. I could make the world make sense. I could protect myself from ever being hurt or disappointed or alone." Ethan sat across from her again, sensing that something important was happening, something she needed to say before she could move forward. "But you can't control everything. You can't protect yourself from life." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "I've spent 20 years building walls, and all I've done is trap myself inside them. I'm 34 years old, and I don't have a single person I can call at midnight when I'm scared. I have employees and shareholders and board members, but I don't have anyone who knows me." "Not really." "Why did you come here tonight?" Ethan asked. "Really?" Vivian was quiet for a long moment. When she answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I saw you in the lobby last week. You were with your daughter, picking her up from the children's holiday party, and she ran to you like you were the most
Important person in the world. You picked her up and she wrapped her arms around your neck, and I could see just by looking at you that nothing else mattered. Not the job, not the company, not anything. Just her." She looked up at him with eyes that held years of carefully suppressed loneliness. "I've never had that. I've never been someone's most important person. And I realized that I was about to make a decision that would take that away from 347 other people. And I couldn't do it without at least trying to understand what I was destroying." Ethan felt the weight of her confession settle over him. He thought about all the times he'd seen Vivian in the hallways or the elevator, always composed, always in control, always alone. He'd assumed, like everyone else, that she had a life outside the office, people who cared about her, places where she could be something other than the CEO. But the truth was so much simpler and sadder. She had the company and nothing else. "If I asked you what to do," Vivian said slowly, "what would you tell me?" Ethan considered the question carefully. He knew the easy answer, the one she probably wanted to hear. Just don't sign it, fight for those jobs, be the hero. But life wasn't that simple, and pretending it was wouldn't help either of them. "I'd tell you that I can't make this decision for you. No one can. You're the one who has to live with the consequences, whatever you choose." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I'd also tell you that Nora taught me something about trust that I never would have learned on my own." Vivian waited, listening. "When she was 5, she wanted to learn to ride a bike. She was terrified, absolutely convinced that she would fall and hurt herself, and she asked me to promise that I wouldn't let go of the bike until she was ready. What did you do?" "I promised. And then, after about an hour of holding on, I realized that she was never going to be ready. Not because she couldn't do it, but because the fear was too big. So I had a choice. I could keep holding on forever, keeping her safe but never letting her grow, or I could let go and trust that even if she fell, she would get back up." "You let go?" "I let go, and she fell. Not badly, just a small tumble onto the grass. She cried for about 30 seconds, and then she looked at me like I'd betrayed her, and I had to kneel down and explain that sometimes loving someone means letting them struggle, because the struggling is how they learn to be strong." Vivian's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Did she understand?" "Not at first, but she got back on the bike, and by the end of the day, she was riding on her own, laughing like it was the best thing in the world."
Ethan leaned forward. You can't protect people from every difficulty, but you can make sure that when they struggle, it's for something meaningful, that their sacrifice serves a purpose greater than a quarterly report. The gray light outside had grown stronger. The city was waking up on the first day of the year, and somewhere across town, Nora would be waking up too, ready to come home. Vivian stood. For a long moment she didn't speak, just stood in the middle of his living room, looking at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "I've built my entire life around being in control," she said finally, "making decisions, giving orders, never showing weakness. And tonight, a man who fixes heating systems told me more truth in a few hours than I've heard in years of board meetings." Ethan stood as well. "I didn't tell you anything you didn't already know. I just said it out loud." She nodded slowly.
Maybe that's what I needed, someone to say it out loud. She moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "The restructuring plan. I'm not going to sign it." "What will you do instead?" "I don't know yet. Something harder, something that will cost me politically, maybe professionally." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Something that means treating people like they matter." Ethan walked her to the door. In the early morning light, Vivian looked different than she had hours ago. The tension in her shoulders had eased. The sharp edges of her expression had softened. She still looked like a CEO, still carried herself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. But there was something else now, too. Something human. "Thank you," she said, "for the honesty, for the conversation, for not treating me like a title. Thank you for trusting me with the truth." She reached for the door handle, then paused. "Your daughter is lucky to have you. I hope you know that." "I know. I'm lucky to have her too." Vivian opened the door, and the cold January air rushed in. She stepped into the hallway, then looked back one more time. "Happy New Year, Ethan." "Happy New Year, Miss Hale." "Vivian," she corrected. "After tonight, I think you've earned the right to use my first name." She walked down the hallway toward the elevator, her footsteps echoing in the early morning quiet. Ethan watched until she disappeared around the corner, then closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a long breath. His phone buzzed with a text message from Nora. "Happy New Year, Daddy. Grammy says you can pick me up at 10. I love you the most." He smiled, typing back, "I love you the most too, sweetheart. See you soon." Then he walked to his window and watched the first sunrise of the new year paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere in the city, Vivian Hale was making her way home, carrying with her the weight of a decision that would change hundreds of lives. Ethan didn't know what she would ultimately do, but he knew that she would do it with her eyes open, and sometimes that was the most anyone could ask. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Meridian Technologies had seen in its 30-year history. Vivian Hale returned from the holiday with a proposal that shocked the board and delighted the financial press. Instead of the mass layoffs everyone expected, she announced a comprehensive restructuring that would preserve jobs while transforming underperforming divisions into new revenue centers. It was bold, risky, and exactly the kind of long-term thinking that Wall Street usually punished. The stock dropped 8% in the first week. 2 board members resigned in protest. Industry analysts called her naive, said she was prioritizing sentiment over strategy, predicted that she would be forced out within the year. But something unexpected happened in the weeks that followed. Employees who had been bracing for layoffs found themselves enrolled in retraining programs. Workers who had expected to lose everything were instead offered opportunities to transition into growing sectors of the business. The message spread through the company like wildfire. Vivian Hale had chosen people over profits. Ethan heard about the changes through the company grapevine like everyone else. He read the emails, attended the town halls, watched as the organization he'd worked for transformed into something he almost didn't recognize. There were still hard times ahead, still sacrifices to be made, but there was also hope, something that had been missing for longer than anyone wanted to admit. 3 weeks after New Year's, Ethan received a call from the CEO's office. He was asked to attend a meeting on the executive floor. No explanation given. He put on his best shirt and took the elevator to the top floor, stepping out into a world he'd only glimpsed from a distance. Vivian's office was smaller than he'd expected, more functional than lavish. She sat behind a desk covered in papers and looked up when he entered, a genuine smile crossing her face. "Close the door," she said. "Please." He did, then stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, unsure of the protocol for meeting with the CEO you'd had an existential conversation with at midnight. "Sit down, Ethan. This isn't an inquisition," he said. "I wanted to thank you properly," Vivian said. "What you said that night about leadership, about trust, about treating people like they matter, it stayed with me. It changed how I approached the restructuring. I saw the announcements. It was brave. It was terrifying. Still is." She laughed, and it sounded different than before, less controlled. "The board thinks I've lost my mind. Half of Wall Street is betting against us, but for the first time in years I can look at myself in the mirror without flinching. That's worth something." "It's worth everything." Vivian leaned forward. "Which brings me to why I asked you here. Someone who doesn't care about politics or positioning, someone who will remind me when I forget that the numbers on the spreadsheet represent human beings." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a role, employee advocate. It's a new position, reports directly to me. Your job would be to represent the workforce in executive decisions, to make sure that the human cost of our choices is always part of the conversation." She paused. "It's not glamorous. It doesn't come with a corner office or a team of assistants, but it comes with something more important." "What's that?" "A seat at the table where decisions get made, a voice for the people who don't usually get one." Ethan sat with the offer, turning it over in his mind. It was everything he'd avoided for years, a step back into the world of corporate politics and executive pressure. But it was also something else, a chance to make a difference, a chance to be in the room when it mattered. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course. Take whatever time you need." Vivian stood and extended her hand. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that our conversation that night changed me. You helped me remember why I wanted to lead in the first place. I won't forget that." Ethan shook her hand, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thank you, Vivian, for the opportunity and for listening." He left her office and took the elevator back down to his regular floor, to his regular job, to the life he'd built around being present for his daughter. The decision would come later, after careful thought, after long conversations with Nora about what changes might mean for their family. But as he walked through the hallways of Meridian Technologies that afternoon, he noticed something different. People were talking to each other, laughing. There was an energy in the building that had been missing for months, the energy of people who believed their work mattered, who trusted that their leaders saw them as more than resources to be optimized. That evening, he picked Nora up from school and took her for ice cream, their usual Thursday tradition. She told him about her day, about the boy who pulled her hair, about the book she was reading, about the drawing she'd made for him in art class. "Daddy," she said between bites of chocolate chip, "Grammy says you might have a new job. Is that true?" He smiled at her, the person who had taught him everything about what really mattered. "Maybe, sweetheart. I'm still thinking about it. Would you be happy?" The question stopped him. Would he be happy? He'd spent so long optimizing for safety, for stability, for being present, that he'd forgotten to ask himself what would actually make him feel alive. "I think so," he said finally. "I think it might be a way to help people, to make things better for families like ours." Nora nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to a 7-year-old. "Then you should do it, Daddy. Grammy says we should always try to help people when we can." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Your Grammy is a wise woman." "I know," Nora grinned. "Can we get more ice cream?" The following New Year's Eve, Ethan's apartment was not quiet. Nora had insisted on staying up for the countdown, and her grandmother had come over to help celebrate. There was food on the table, warm this time, and laughter filling the rooms that had once felt so empty. At 11:58, there was a knock at the door. Ethan exchanged a glance with his mother, then crossed the room and opened it. Vivian stood in the hallway, but this time she wasn't alone. She carried a bottle of champagne and wore something that wasn't a business suit for the first time he'd ever seen. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said,
and there was a lightness in her voice that hadn't been there a year ago. "I brought something to celebrate." Ethan stepped aside. "You're always welcome here." Vivian came in and was immediately accosted by Nora, who had heard stories about the CEO lady who had come to visit Daddy last year. Within minutes, the two of them were sitting on the floor, Vivian admiring Nora's collection of stuffed animals, while Nora explained the complex social dynamics of her second-grade class. Ethan's mother appeared at his side, watching the scene with a knowing smile. "She seems different than I expected." "She's been working on it," Ethan said. "We all have." The countdown came and went, the new year arriving with cheers and champagne, and Nora staying up far too late. When things finally settled down, when his mother had taken Nora to bed and the apartment had grown quiet again, Ethan found himself standing at the window with Vivian, watching the last fireworks fade over the city. "The board approved the final phase of the restructuring yesterday," she said. "0 involuntary layoffs. We made it." "How does it feel?" "Terrifying." "Exhilarating," she smiled. "Right." They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Two people who had found something unexpected in each other. Not romance or anything so simple, but understanding, the recognition that they were both trying to be better, both learning how to lead with something other than fear. "Thank you," Vivian said finally, "for taking the job, for being the voice in the room that reminds us what we're actually fighting for. Thank you for giving me the chance." She turned to face him. "Same time next year?" Ethan thought about the year behind him and the year ahead. He thought about Nora sleeping peacefully in the next room, about the company that had become something he was proud to be part of, about the woman standing beside him who had proven that people could change if they were brave enough to try. "Same time next year," he agreed. The knock at midnight meant one thing a year ago. Tonight it meant something different. It meant that the silence had been filled, that the emptiness had found its answer, that two people had helped each other remember what really mattered. Outside, the first sunrise of another new year was still hours away. But for the first time in a long time, neither of them was in any hurry to see it come. Some moments were worth holding on to, and some doors once opened were meant to stay that